I'd like to welcome everyone to our Theosophical online Sundays. We're really pleased to be able to present these online. They actually came about because, yes, John is muted, Esme. He'll be back on shortly when I'm off, okay? So these came about because of the COVID situation in Auckland and the traffic light restrictions that were on. So that's how we've ended up being online. And we kind of made the decision at National Section that we wouldn't discriminate against anybody. So if we could all not attend all of these, that's why we've ended up online. And this is very much in line with our first object as well. Now, having said this, I'm pleased to host our first talk. It's the first of 12 that we'll be having, and it goes through till April 10 this year. After the presentation tonight, you will be able to ask questions, but I'd like you to type them into the chat box on the right side, and then I'll read out the question from there, okay? Both Danica and I are administrators. She will be here shortly, so it'll be one of us reading those out. Now our theme for our series is Awakening the Heart, Regenerating Change Within. And I have the great pleasure of introducing our national president, which I've done on lots of occasions, John Vorstermans. And John is both a long-term student and teacher of the ancient wisdom for over, and I didn't get to ask him how many years, but I think it's at least 40 years, something like that. And John's presentation tonight is entitled Regenerating Change Within. So welcome, John. I'll hand over to you. Welcome, John.
So hello, everybody. It's good to be here this evening, and a different way of doing things for me anyway, over Zoom, or giving a talk over Zoom. So tonight we're looking at regeneration and its context to ourselves. Regeneration is a term often used in regards to improving or rebirth or renewal. So in this case, we're looking at regeneration of ourselves as opposed to looking at regeneration in the outer world or society or things like that. Excuse me, I'm going to start with some PowerPoints. All right, so looking at the symbol for regeneration, the most common is the serpent swallowing its tail. It's a symbol of transformation, rebirth, healing, fertility, immortality, and metamorphosis. It's also well known as the Ouroboros by many. Now, it's a symbol that you see in our emblem at the Theosophical Society. You can see in the top left of your screen. It surrounds the triangle. And it's also used in the caduceus, as you see in the bottom right, which is two serpents around the staff of the caduceus. In this case, it has a slightly different meaning. So it still stands for wisdom, but the caduceus has two snakes, and they represent the Ida and the Pingala that go up and down our spine. Perhaps we'll talk more about that later. Madame Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine calls it the mundane egg, perhaps one of the most universally adopted symbols. It's highly suggestive, as it is equally in the spiritual, physiological, and cosmological sense. Therefore, it is found in every world theogony, where it is largely associated with the serpent symbol, the latter being everywhere, in philosophy, as in religious symbolism, an emblem of eternity, infinitude, regeneration, and rejuvenation, as well as wisdom. The mystery of apparent self-generation and evolution through its own creative power, repeated in miniature, the process of cosmic evolution in the egg, both being due to heat and moisture under the influx of the unseen creative spirit, justified fully the selection of this graphic symbol. So this is typically in the language of the secret doctrine, which is not written in a language that's often easy to understand. In the secret doctrine, the mundane egg is the egg that from which everything manifests, essentially. And it's a symbol really of the snake swallowing itself. So it's evolution or reincarnation over and over and over again. It's never ending. So it's what we would call the symbol of regeneration. So in the serpent has always been a symbol of wisdom. And the Hindus call their wise men nagas, which is a word meaning serpent. Christ adjured his disciples to be wise as serpents. What is now as the aureus or sacred cobra seen on the forehead of the pharaohs of Egypt, denoted his or her intuition into the sacred rites, where knowledgeable was gained of a hidden wisdom. The serpent swallowing its tail represents the circle of the universe, the endlessness of the cyclic process of manifestation. So the universe, as explained in the secret doctrine, who started from a primordial egg, which expanded, and then the egg hatched, and the universe was created. And there's a sort of a synonym for the creation of the universe, or the multiverse, as it's often called. And the multiverse goes through its own evolutionary cycle of expansion, then contraction back into the egg, and then is reborn again, eventually into an egg, or from an egg. So everything in the universe goes through the cyclic process of birth, growth, and then old age, and then death, and then rebirth, growth, old age, and death. And the universe itself is no different. One of the most interesting books to read regarding, what the Theosophical Society is about, why it was established, is a book called The Key to Theosophy, which was written by H.B. Blavatsky. I think it's one of the last books she wrote before she died in 1889, I think it was. And it explains what her vision of the Theosophical Society was about. And it's written in a question-answer sort of format. So the inquirer asks the question, and then the Theosophist answers the question. In this case, obviously, Madame Blavatsky was the inquirer and the Theosophist, so she wrote her own questions, I guess, which is quite funny. So the inquirer says, in this case, your doctrine then is not a revival of Buddhism, nor are they entirely copied from the Neoplatonic theosophy. The Neoplatonic theosophy was a theosophy which was much earlier than the current Theosophical Society, of course. Anyway, her answer is, they are not. But in these questions, I cannot give you a better answer than by quoting from a paper read on theosophy by Dr. J.D. Buke before the Theosophical Convention in Chicago in America in April 1889. no living theosophist has better expressed the understanding or understood the real essence of theosophy than our honored friend Dr. Buke. And so I quote him here. I'm not going to read his whole message out, but he says the Theosophical Society was organized for the purpose of promulgating the theosophical doctrine and for the promotion of the theosophical life. And I want to sort of highlight here that it's for the promotion of the theosophical life. And I think that statement is interesting because it points to the fact that theosophy is something to be lived. It's not just a bit of knowledge or an interest, but it's something to be lived, to be explored with your life, to be made practical in one way or another. So he goes on to say that, you know, he's studied and read theosophy from the past. In fact, he talks about the Theosophical Transactions of the Philosophical Society, which was published in London in 1697. So this was a Theosophical Society that predated the current Theosophical Society. And there was also some other references that he read and studied. The Mysteries of Christ is one of those. That is a deity, nature, and creature embracing the philosophy of all the workings and powers of life, magical and spiritual, and forming a practical guide to the sublimest purity, sanctity, and evangelical performance. And this was an article written in 1855 and published in London. So theosophy was never new. It's always been there in one form or another. But I want to highlight again that the main point from this is that the promotion of a theosophical life. I'm going to go on and continue with looking at the key to theosophy. And here's another question answer. So the inquirer in this case asks, and what may be the duty of a theosophist to himself? And the answer in this case is to control and conquer through the higher, the lower self. So it's to control and conquer through the higher to the lower self. And that's interesting to think about because mostly we try and conquer the lower to reach the higher. In this case, she's saying through the higher, the lower self. So for me, this is about reconnecting and awakening with our higher self. And then the lower becomes a servant of the higher. And then she goes on to say, to purify himself inwardly and morally, to fear no one and nought save the tribunal of his own conscience, never to do a thing by halves, be not diverted from your duty by any idle reflection the silly world may make upon you, for their censures are not in your power, and consequently should not be part of your concern. So there's quite a bit in those words, really, that is worth reflecting on. So to control and conquer through the higher, the lower self, I think is an interesting idea, an interesting thing to explore. And it's something that we have to do within ourselves. It's not something that happens by itself. And then to purify himself inwardly and morally. So inwardly it's all about a way of life, how you relate to the world in a positive, caring, compassionate, truthful, an ethical manner, and to fear no one and not save the tribunal of his own consciousness. So for me, that embraces the idea that you say and speak up honestly and when needed, rather than sitting back and not speaking up or saying anything because you fear being ridiculed or you fear the consequences. So someone with a good, strong conscience needs to speak up when it's necessary. Never do things by halves. Well, certainly, when we do something, we have to put all our focus and energy into it if it's going to happen. So some interesting thoughts to keep in the back of your mind that HBB points to in the key to theosophy. Now, I'll repeat what I said earlier. The key to theosophy, I think, is a really worthwhile study in a group or by yourself, because it contains so much understanding of what have become theosophical tenets or principles or teachings over the past 140 odd years. Something that, is worth looking into. Next, I'd like to just focus a little bit of time on the Golden Stairs. Now, when we joined the Theosophical Society in New Zealand, everybody is sent a copy of the Golden Stairs. It's a little one-page plaque, and it's got written on it exactly what you can see in front of you in this slide. H.B. Blavatsky taught that there was no easy path to the knowledge and the truth, and that truth could be known and wisdom achieved only through noble living and courageous service to humanity. Among the directions that she left for the courageous journey is a statement that is known as the Golden Stairs, by which such progress can be made towards an ultimate wisdom. So in the Golden Stairs, 13 steps up the stairs to be mounted. She names them a stairway, suggesting that there is an order and a sequence to the steps on the stairs, that the stairway has structure and form, and the very step must therefore be trodden in its proper turn or its proper order. If we can see an order to the steps, then the stairway will take on a new meaning and value. The Golden Stairs is not merely a list of rules, but a way of life with infinite values in the study of each step. So I'll repeat again, once again, the Golden Stairs is not something of intellectual curiosity, not a set of rules, but a way of life. Let us first take a quick overall glance at the Golden Stairs, consisting of 13 steps. It starts off with a clean life, an opened mind, a pure heart, an eager intellect. These first 4 steps, as described, a high standard of human development and self-control, in ordinary, cultured, and ethical living. Cleanliness, openness of mind, purity of heart, and eagerness of intellectual search are characteristic of many everywhere in the world. The 4 qualifications are all associated with development and control of our mental, emotional and physical nature. And they are of the order attainable without any special guidance or knowledge of or contact with the wisdom teachings. So, however, they are prerequisites to number 5, an unveiled spiritual perception. And as I said earlier, there are steps. So the step starts with a clean life, which is your attitude and your ethical interaction with the world around us. An open mind, which I'll go into a little bit more shortly. And a pure heart is, the heart is what we weigh the truth and the non-truth, the right and the wrong. The heart is our most important vehicle, an eager intellect. So you need to develop a keen sense of learning and understanding, and then develops an unveiled spiritual perception. Here comes a perception, that recognition that there is something more, a greater self within us, a divine plan, a vision of a larger purpose of life. And then comes a brotherliness, or oneness, or unity for all, a readiness to give and receive advice and instruction, a loyal sense of duty to the teacher, a willing obedience to the behest of truth. Now, referring back, we find that the first 4 steps were all descriptive of the well-rounded qualities of our personal self. They were personal qualifications. Then in the 5th step comes a vision of the greater. Now in the next 4 steps, we find expressions of relationship, unity, giving, receiving, advice, instruction, duty, and obedience. These are not unilateral conditions, but conditions of relationship involving other people. The final 4 of the 13 steps of the stairs are given as number 10 is a courageous endurance of personal injustice, a brave declaration of principles, a valiant defense of those who are unjustly attacked, and a constant eye to the ideal of human progression and perfection. These 4 are also fall into the group, for each constitutes an expression, relationship with the spiritual soul, the higher self. The qualities are endurance, bravery in the support of principles, opposition to injustice, and an eye to the great plan, all expressed of the self in action and service. So regeneration, if we look at the golden stairs, this is the steps that we can take to regenerate ourselves. Each of those steps opens up something very strong within ourselves. It's an exploration of ourselves, not others, just ourselves. So we have here, 1 to 4, steps 1 to 4 are preparation. Step 5 is the unveiling and the vision. 6 to 9 are the relationships and the training. 10 to 13, the discovery and release of the self in enlightened action. So far, we have discovered some meaning to the grouping, significance to the order, and to the sequence and the steps on the stairway. So as part of the regenerative process of transformation, the golden stairs gives huge guidance with regards to self-development along this journey. We can take each of these steps and explore them in a mundane, in much more detail. I'm going to look a little bit further at just one of the steps, an open mind, which I think is essential as we start our journey of regeneration or even self-discovery. So in this step, Prejudices, preconceptions, and fixations of mind have to be observed and dealt with. Reflection is the key word. The opening of the mind to permit examination of the new and possibly conflicting idea, which might automatically have been disregarded. Examination not for acceptance because of automatic fitting into a long established mental grooves, nor for rejection because of failure to fit. So blind acceptance or blind rejection is no indication that beliefs are either right or wrong. Some new idea may go against our beliefs or principles, which should be examined as necessary, reviewed, for even the principle may evolve in view of wider views and greater wisdom. So talking more on a personal level, I've found that on my own journey, that when my mind is closed, I often reject someone else's view or idea. Now, I've sat over cups of coffee when people have shared with me perspectives and perceptions, and suddenly I find myself rejecting them and disagreeing. But I disagree not because they are right or wrong, but because I have a fixed view of what is right or wrong. And I was not willing to let go of my fixed view and examine another view. And on examining another view and being open to another view, I realized that my view was actually incorrect. I only had a partial picture of something. So to actually look at our own reactions when we reject something in our lives, it's a sure sign that, we have a closed mind. Or at least there's an opportunity to examine our understanding, our beliefs, our perceptions. So look at your own lives, look at the arguments and the perceptions that you have of what's going on around you. And perhaps these perceptions are a result of your own beliefs and views, which are incorrect. So the open mind is about learning how to view things openly without rejecting them. Now, if you hear something and you find you cannot believe it's true, then put it aside, but don't reject it. Look at it and then research it. Use your discernment, your discrimination to find out whether this is correct or not. And never reject anything until you've explored it to the nth degree so that you know if it's true or not. So everything I believe and you believe needs to be proven and not just accepted because someone's told you this or someone's given you a bit of paper which says this is true, or you've learned it through your educational process. It may not be correct. Explore. So without that open mind and that willingness to explore, then it's impossible to move any further on this journey. And then the pure heart is there to help you weigh up how you feel at a very inner level about something. The heart is the sense of using your intuition and your understanding as well as part of this process. So it's quite a step. So spending time actually exploring the golden stairs as a practical exercise in your life is one of the best ways, I think, to help regenerate yourself and to begin to discover who you really are. So it's a never-ending journey, I think. Some people, like the suggestion is that the golden stairs are steps up the stairs to the temple of divine wisdom. Yet, forever we need to watch every aspect of these steps along the way. We might think we've conquered one and move on to the next, to only find out 4 or 5 steps later that no, we haven't quite got there yet. So it's an interesting journey, one that is worth taking. So we don't actually have to look very far for this wisdom around us. Like the golden stairs is simple to read and to look at, but when you go into it, it's a huge journey and a huge discovery that takes us to amazing places. So sometimes the best material to focus on is what appears to be the simplest. Another one of those is At the Feet of the Master by Alcyone. So Alcyone was a pseudonym that Jiddu Krishnamurti used, and he apparently wrote this book when he was very, very young, and the book are his interpretation of instructions given to him by his master, which was for him to learn how to develop his deeper spiritual connection, to deepen his spiritual connection. So it's a amazing little book. I'm sure you've all got copies of it. The book has briefly 4 qualifications that Alcyone describes that are required to deepen the spiritual connection. And the first one is discrimination. It's often called discernment these days, but I don't think discernment covers discrimination completely. So discrimination, for me, in a nutshell, means learning the difference between what is true and what is not true. So that sounds very black and white, but it's about discovering ever more what is real and what is not real. And it's an ongoing process. So it's a process which helps to develop the intuition, the higher self. And through the process, we learn to uncover that intuitive nature where we know innately what is right and what is wrong. But to get there from a mental level, it's quite a struggle, because at the mental level, we have to discover each time what is true and what is not true. And that's a journey. And in this day and age, it's a particularly difficult journey when we're living now in a world where we have got, all sorts of different alternative truths being offered out there, or conspiracy theories that are out there. But how do we know what is true and what is not true? What is real and what is not real? We can, if we like, we can research this all over the internet, but how do we even know what we see on the internet is true and not true? So part of this journey requires us to also weigh up what we find with the heart, with our intuition. And then the next step is the desirelessness. So this is reducing our wants as much as we can in time. The third one is a good one, is good conduct, which is an interesting term. So under good conduct, he has 6 aspects to it. The first is self-control as to the mind. And that's a huge journey within itself. Self-control as to the mind. So is that developing a sort of mindfulness, an awareness of thoughts coming in and going out of the mind? There's self-control in action. Do we think before we act? There's tolerance. So how tolerant are we? I see myself as a fairly tolerant person, except when I get behind the wheel of my car, I'm late for a meeting. And then I seem to get a bit of road rage. So it's interesting to watch these things. Developing cheerfulness, one-pointedness, and confidence. So those are the 6 qualities under good conduct. And the last one is love. And love really is a Buddhic quality. The love is about the unifying force, the thing that unifies us all together. And it's quite interesting. Just The Feet of the Master is quite an interesting book to read and reflect on over and over again. To get to a group and talk about it, study it. In the slide, I've got a little quote, which I find quite interesting. It says, if you hear a story against anyone, do not repeat it. It may not be true. And even if it is kinder to say nothing. Think well before speaking, lest you should fall into inaccuracy. I think it's quite an interesting little statement. One of the most destructive things in our life today is gossip, particularly malicious gossip. And that causes so much damage in our world today. When you take the golden stairs and the feet of the master into context, when you hear gossip, unkind gossip about someone, do you listen to it? Or do you say, no, thanks, I'm not interested in that? And if you listen, and if, our ego, of course, wants to know what the gossip is. We love hearing gossip. And then you hear the gossip, which is unkind about somebody else, or it's unjust about somebody else. You go to the other person, and do you talk to the other person to find out if what is true or not? That's what a real person on the journey would do. You would say to the person, I'm not interested in this gossip. It does no one any good. Or if the gossip is malicious, then perhaps you talk to the person that it involves and find out their point of view. This is the way of the spiritual warrior. So I want to talk a little bit now about the power of thought. The slide shows a quote from the Master Kutumi, who was one of the Mahatmas who helped or was behind the formation of the Theosophical Society. And in the 1880s, they had correspondence with a gentleman or 2 gentlemen, one called A.P. Sinnett, and the other one was K.H., or one was A.O. Hume. Hume was a member of the Indian government. And eventually when India had home rule, he was involved in helping the Indian community establish their processes, etc. Anyway, it's about the power of thought. And I'm going to paraphrase what it says here, but what the Master is saying, that every thought that we have has a repercussion. So a thought that we have, which is strong and intent, creates in the inner world an elemental, which means that the thought, so putting it in modern language, it means that the thought that we create takes on a life of its own. And that thought hovers around us through our life. So so in this world, we are all creating these thought entities in the inner world, which surrounds us and is attracted by people who have similar ideas and thoughts to ourselves. These thoughts become living entities. So when you sit down and you try and meditate, and suddenly this thought comes into your head, and you wonder where it came from. Well, perhaps it's one of these living entities that's coming back with a thought that you created, a strong thought that you created. So, in Buddhism, they call these thoughts skandhas. In Hinduism, they're named karma. The adepts evolves these shapes consciously. Other men throw them off unconsciously. So a wise man might create thoughts in the mental world which are alive to help the future of humanity, to help things evolve. You imagine if we all created positive, endearing, compassionate thoughts that unite on how different the world would be today, when many of the thoughts in the thought world are thoughts that destroy, create disharmony, are selfish, are thoughts that, over time are very, very destructive. Personal thoughts of power and ambition do no good in the world. Dr. Emoto was someone who spent a lot of time working with thoughts. He did all those experiments with water, where he would freeze the water, and then as the frozen water was melting, he would take photos of it with a microscope, and he'd have these beautiful, well, not always beautiful, but you'd see the crystalline form in the water. And he would take polluted water, which would come out as a crystal that didn't look very nice. And he would then spend time with the students praying over this water. And the water would then be frozen, crystallized, and then unfrozen again. And then the crystal patterns were transformed into a beautiful form. And this shows you the power of positive thought on something. So you imagine if we all prayed where we saw ugliness for beauty, and how that could transform something. The experiment that I tried out was the one he did with boiled rice. So I boiled some rice up and put them in a jar, or in 2 jars. And one I put a sticker on that said beautiful, and the other one I put a sticker on that said ugly. And I put them in a cupboard for 3 months. And after 3 months, I took them out. The one that said beautiful was still pure white as the day I put it in the jar. And the one that said ugly, the rice was black. And it showed me how powerful just the words we have are. How conscious are we that words have an energy that goes with them? And that energy of those words affects the people around us and the people we talk to. So if we use positive, friendly, compassionate language. How different that would be if we used coarse, hard, and negative language. So, this is where this whole idea of the power of thoughts come in. Thoughts start in the mind. And usually our thoughts are subconscious. We're not aware of our thoughts. But if we were aware of our thoughts and took time to reflect on our thoughts before we acted and before we spoke, our thoughts, our actions would be quite different mostly than they are. So the next thing is the three poisons. This is also something that the Master KH talked about to AP Synod. So if you look around, he said, if you look around you, my friend, he urges the Englishman, see the three poisons raging within the heart of men: anger, greed, and delusion. And he goes on, here details those characteristics as a fivefold obscurities, ever presenting humanity from seeing truth: envy, passion, vacillation, sloth, and unbelief. In some Buddhist texts, the three poisons are referred to as three fires, which ever burn in the heart: the smoke from which pollutes and obscures right perception. Master KH later refers to the Abhidharma texts of the Buddhist tradition, in which traces all human suffering to our tainted attitudes, defined as mental orientation rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion, which can only be overcome by ethical development that culminates in the perfection of purity, attained with the mind's irreversible emancipation from all defilement. Can we not trace all our current world problems, all human suffering, to these causes: anger, greed, and delusion? Is not envy the result of greed, while passion arises with anger, and indecision and sloth are grounded in delusion? So think about these things. So man, after all, is a victim of his surroundings while he lives in the atmosphere of society. It is not easy to remove ourselves from the poisons and obscurities, or to put out the fires of personal self-interest and egotism. Yet this is the work to which we are, as students of theosophy, have been called if we are serious in our aspirations and intentions. So egotism, which is simply personal desire, is one of those destructive things that is very hard to, which creates so much disharmony in the world today. If we can put aside our personal wants and desires and work within the scope of a united world, seeing everybody as individuals, as spiritual souls on this journey, trying to learn, trying to understand, then our perception changes. Our greed or desires are no longer important. What is important is the welfare and goodwill of everybody and the harmony in the world. With personal desires come wars, come conflict. So something very, very important to consider. the mind is the slayer of the real. Let the disciples slay the slayer. Most members of the Theosophical Society are quite familiar with this saying. It's from the Voice of the Silence. In fact, it's from page 1 of the Voice of the Silence. And once again, it points to the nature of the mind. So the Voice of the Silent uses the term, the mind is the great slayer of the real. So what does that mean? So the mind is the slayer of the real. That's, once again, pointing to the same things I talked to previously. It is the mind itself that creates the illusion and the false reality that we live in. You know, it reminds me a bit of The Matrix, the first movie, where everyone is caught in this illusion, this dream, which they think is real. And it's no different from us. We're in a reality that we create with our mind. But what if I said this reality isn't real? It's a dream. How do you feel about that? Is this true? And many of the ancient scriptures that I've studied call this world a dream. When we die, it's like waking up from a dream, some say. Isn't that scary? But when we, in this life, dream and we wake up, we don't remember our dreams. We might remember bits of it. Or when the dream shocks us, then we might wake up because something's happened. So you know, the challenge is for us, it goes on to say, let the disciples slay the slayer, which is not an easy task. You know, this requires us to really think and work and look and reflect upon what's happening in our mind. I'm convinced that the only way to understand the mind is to develop mindfulness, which is a meditative process where one sits and just focuses on the mind itself, watches the mind, is aware of the mind, and sees a thought as it rises, but does not attach oneself to the thought. Sankaracharya, one of the great Hindu exponents, he was born about, I think he lived at about 500 AD, and he started the Vedanta movement. He says that when we are dreaming, it seems very real, but when we wake up, it's no longer real. When this world becomes a dream and the other world becomes real, it sounds almost impossible, doesn't it? But Saint Teresa describes it. She writes, I look down on the world from a very great height, and I care very little what people say or know about me. The Lord has now made my life a kind of sleep. For almost always, all I see seems to me as a dream. Nor have I any great sense of pleasure or pain. There was only one time in my life when I experienced that, when I came out of prison. I think it was because I had not said a word. I had been hemmed in for months, but for 3 days after I came out of prison, everything looked to me like a cinematograph. It didn't look real. I suppose this is going from the unreal to the real. I never felt quite like that again, but I remember it today. Kill all the forms he sees in dreams. When he has ceased to hear the many, he may discern the one, the inner sound which kills the outer sound. So I'm coming to an end now. So awakening soul awareness. So there's 4 key points that I would like to just bring up for your consideration. So each of us must find our means or way of developing a heart, mind, or soul awareness. Some possible ways that may be helpful are a close and careful examination of the world in which we live. Consider the advice of great teachers alongside our own experience, reasoning, and of research, such as what modern science has to say. Work carefully and with this passion on exploring what is real and unreal, and being open to question or open to questioning our understanding of what we discover. We will quite possibly find that the things are not what they appear to be, and that will bring changes in our actions. Create a 24-hour choiceless, mindful awareness. You know, when I meditate, I meditate for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. It's quite a struggle to remain mindful for that long. But with practice, we can develop a 24-hour choiceless, mindful awareness. It just takes practice. Prepare a fertile ground for transformation experiences by setting up your awareness practices. So with those thoughts, I'll say thank you to everybody.